Monica Lewis was a name known throughout the neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina. With her statuesque presence, flawless fashion sense, and the enviable elegance of a woman who had tasted both life's sweetness and bitterness, she was seen as the epitome of success. Her home, a two-story colonial-style house painted in soft beige, with white trim and a garden filled with vibrant blooms, stood as a beacon of order and beauty. But beyond the manicured lawn and friendly smiles hid fractures that would soon shatter her seemingly perfect life. At 50, Monica carried herself with the confidence of someone who had conquered adversity. Yet inside there was an emptiness. Her husband, Harold Lewis, a high-profile attorney known for his sharp wit and relentless dedication to his work, had long since ceased to be the attentive man she once knew. Their conversations were now mere exchanges of logistical details, and their shared moments were limited to silent dinners and the occasional formal event. Harold's mind was always elsewhere, focused on court battles and late-night meetings. Monica felt trapped in a routine of loneliness. Everything changed one summer when Justin Carter, the son of Monica's close friend Camilla Carter, came back home from college. He was 22, brimming with the kind of youthful energy that radiated from his easy grin and confident stride. Monica first noticed him while tending to her garden one sweltering afternoon. Justin was helping his mother unload groceries from their car, his muscles taut beneath a plain white t-shirt, beads of sweat glistening on his dark skin as he laughed at something Camilla said. Monica felt a warmth creep up her neck, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She brushed it off, but the seed was planted. Days turned into weeks, and their paths began to cross more frequently. A chance encounter at the local grocery store turned into a casual chat, which turned into inside jokes and laughter shared over cups of iced tea on Monica's porch. The line between innocence and temptation blurred with every passing day. Justin's attention made Monica feel vibrant, seen, and alive, things she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't long before their hands touched one evening as they both reached for the same glass. The moment was electric, sparking a fire that neither could deny. Monica knew the risks. Justin was the son of her friend, and she was a married woman with a reputation to uphold. But the thrill was intoxicating. Justin, on his end, was drawn not just to Monica's beauty, but to the wisdom and depth she exuded, a stark contrast to the carefree girls at college. Their secret meetings became more frequent, each one charged with the tension of discovery. They would meet in the late afternoon when Harold was still immersed in court cases or working long hours at the firm. The world around them melted away in those moments, whispers shared in the cool shade of the living room, soft laughter that turned into hushed silences, and stolen kisses that tasted of forbidden bliss. One late summer evening, Monica sat in the dim light of her living room, the weight of what she was doing pressing down on her. She clutched a bracelet Justin had left behind, turning it over in her hands as memories of their last encounter flooded her mind. The guilt was there, lurking behind the passion, but it wasn't strong enough to drown out the thrill. The silence of the house enveloped her, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She was so deep in thought that she didn't hear Harold's car pull into the driveway until it was too late. The sudden jingle of keys and the creak of the front door snapped her out of her reverie. "Monica?" Harold's voice was calm but distant, as always. She quickly tucked the bracelet into the folds of her dress and stood, smoothing down her hair as if nothing was amiss. "Welcome home, dear," she said, forcing a smile that she hoped looked genuine. But Harold's eyes lingered on her a moment too long, as if he sensed the shift, the subtle change in her that even she hadn't fully acknowledged. Little did Monica know, this moment was only the beginning. The web she had woven with Justin was fragile, and it would only take one wrong move to unravel everything. The weeks that followed were filled with the kind of tension that made Monica's heart race and her mind whirl. Her moments with Justin had evolved into an escape she couldn't resist, but they came with a price. Every touch, every whispered word felt stolen, wrapped in the shroud of secrecy that thrilled and haunted her at the same time. And now, subtle signs of suspicion began to creep into her carefully balanced life. Harold's late nights at the law firm grew fewer. He was coming home earlier, his sharp eyes more watchful, lingering on Monica with a look she couldn't decipher. One evening, as they sat in their elegant dining room, the clinking of silverware and the ticking of the clock were the only sounds. Harold cleared his throat, a small noise that felt like a thunderclap in the silence. "You've seemed different lately," he said, his tone casual but probing. He cut his steak with surgical precision, never taking his eyes off her. Monica forced a soft chuckle. "Different how?" She took a sip of her wine, willing her hand not to shake. "Just happier, lighter." Harold leaned back, fork suspended as if the answer lay somewhere in the air between them. "Is that a bad thing?" she countered, meeting his gaze with what she hoped was playful defiance. "No, not bad." His lips tightened into what could have been a smile or the shadow of suspicion. The conversation ended as abruptly as it began, leaving Monica with a pit of dread in her stomach. The following week, Monica and Justin continued their clandestine meetings, but the weight of reality began to settle in. One afternoon, as they lay on the sun-dappled sofa, Justin traced patterns on her wrist with his fingertips. "We can't keep doing this forever, you know," he whispered, a hint of sadness coloring his words. His eyes, usually so bright and carefree, were now troubled. Monica turned her head, looking at him with an ache in her chest she hadn't expected. "I know, but I can't give this up. Not yet." "Neither can I," Justin admitted, his voice low. "But if anyone finds out—" "We'll be careful," she interrupted, pressing her lips to his to silence the unspoken fears. But deep down, Monica knew that secrecy was a thin veil, easily torn by the sharp edges of reality. Camilla Carter, Justin's mother and Monica's longtime friend, had also started noticing changes in her son. He was more secretive, more distant. She chalked it up to the growing pains of early adulthood, but her maternal instincts nagged at her. One evening, she found herself standing at the window, watching the glow of the Lewis's living room, where Monica sat in the dim light. There was something in the air, something she couldn't name but felt in her bones. Harold, too, began to take subtle steps toward uncovering the truth. He glanced through Monica's phone when she wasn't looking, rifled through drawers when she stepped out of the room. It was during one of these quiet searches that he found an unfamiliar bracelet on the floor of the hallway. It was small, masculine, with a simple silver band, a style that seemed out of place in his home. His pulse quickened, but he slipped it back into the drawer, saying nothing. He was a man who played the long game. One evening, Monica sat alone in the darkened living room, her mind a cacophony of conflicting emotions. The house was quiet, too quiet. She felt the weight of the silence pressing down on her, suffocating. The grandfather clock chimed, each toll a reminder that time was running out. The knot in her stomach tightened as the front door opened, and Harold stepped in. His eyes swept over her, unreadable as always. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice steady, practiced. "Yes," Monica replied, a little too quickly. "Good." He paused, the silence between them thickening like smoke. "I'm glad." As Harold disappeared up the stairs, Monica released a breath she didn't know she was holding. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the erratic beat of her heart. The walls of their home, once a sanctuary, now felt like the closing bars of a cage. Little did she know, Harold's silence was not ignorance, it was patience. And soon, the delicate balance of her hidden world would come crashing down with a force that none of them could predict. Monica's life had become a careful dance on a tightrope, and every step felt shakier than the last. The summer air was heavy, suffocating, filled with the scent of cut grass and storm clouds on the horizon. Each day brought a new wave of unease that threatened to topple the balance she struggled to maintain. And now, her world was closing in faster than she could push it away. Justin's calls had become more insistent, filled with a frustration that gnawed at her. He was young, impetuous, and the thrill of their secret had turned into something that bordered on desperation. One evening, as the sunset bathed the neighborhood in a crimson glow, Monica received a message from him. "We need to talk, tonight." Her fingers trembled as she read the words, the weight of their affair suddenly heavier than ever before. She replied with a simple, "Okay," and glanced over her shoulder at the sound of Harold moving in the other room. He had been home more often, his eyes more calculating, the questions more pointed. The silence between them had become a taut string, waiting to snap. Later that night, with Harold lost in a stack of legal briefs in his study, Monica slipped out into the warm, dense air. The neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows across the sidewalk. She reached Justin's house and found him waiting at the end of the driveway, his expression a mix of longing and frustration. "We can't keep pretending, Monica," he said, voice low but urgent. "It's killing me. I need to know what we're doing, what you're doing." "Justin, please," Monica whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "This isn't the time. If not now, then when?" He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking as his hand found hers. The warmth of his touch sent a familiar shiver through her, one that she had tried to ignore for days now. "I love you, Monica. I can't be a secret forever." Monica's breath caught in her throat. The word love felt like both a balm and a blade. She couldn't deny that she cared for him, but this was a game with rules that neither of them could bend without breaking. "Justin, you don't understand." Before she could finish, the sound of an engine rumbling down the street made them both freeze. The headlights of Harold's car illuminated the dark, sweeping across the two of them like an accusatory spotlight. Monica's pulse spiked as she let go of Justin's hand and took a step back, the color draining from her face. The car slowed as it neared, but Harold did not stop. He drove past, eyes locked on the road ahead, the flicker of recognition in his gaze sending a chill through her. Monica stood rooted in place, her world teetering on the edge of collapse. Justin reached for her, but she pulled away, fear clouding her eyes. "Go inside," she whispered harshly. "Now." The following days were a blur. Harold's demeanor shifted subtly, his silence more pronounced, his gaze sharp enough to cut. Monica felt herself unraveling. Every glance over her shoulder, every creak in the floorboards, felt like a prelude to disaster. She barely slept, haunted by the memory of Harold's car passing in the night, the knowledge that he knew, or at least suspected. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast the room in shadows, Harold approached her. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the dim glow of the hallway light. The room felt colder with him in it, the unspoken tension finally reaching its breaking point. "Are you going to tell me?" His voice was calm, too calm. "Tell you what?" Monica's voice cracked, betraying her. "About the boy," Harold said, eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. "Don't lie to me, Monica." The space between them felt suffocating, filled with things that had never been said. Monica's throat tightened as she fought to keep her composure, but she could see it in his eyes. He already knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. Harold's expression darkened, and for a moment the silence that followed was deafening. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Monica alone in the darkened room, the sound of his footsteps echoing like a warning. She knew that whatever came next would be beyond her control. The next day, Justin came over, defying her warnings. His insistence was relentless, his eyes filled with anger and passion as he stormed into the house. The argument that followed was heated, voices rising as the reality of their affair spilled out into the open. "You need to leave," Monica pleaded, her voice shaking. But before she could push him out, the front door creaked open. Harold stood there, eyes cold and unreadable. The room fell silent, save for the sound of their breathing. The look on Harold's face was one Monica had never seen before, a mixture of betrayal and something far more dangerous. "Am I interrupting?" Harold's voice was laced with quiet fury. Before Monica could speak, Justin stepped forward. "This isn't what it looks like," he started, but Harold's expression didn't change. "Enough," Harold said, his tone final. The storm had finally come, and as Monica looked between the two men, she knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The room was charged with a silence that felt electric, stretched thin by the presence of betrayal and fury. Monica's heart pounded in her chest, every beat echoing in her ears as Harold stepped further into the room. Justin's shoulders tensed, his jaw set in a defiant line as he stood his ground. The seconds ticked by like hours, each one thick with the weight of things unspoken. Harold's eyes moved from Justin to Monica, then back again. The realization that his suspicions were true seemed to settle in his expression, and something shifted behind his gaze. It was as if a mask had cracked, revealing the raw anger beneath. "I should have known," Harold said quietly, his voice calm in a way that was more unsettling than a shout. "All those late nights, all those times I turned a blind eye." Monica felt a wave of nausea wash over her. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She had convinced herself that she could control the narrative, keep the lines blurred and hidden. But now, as the truth hung in the air, there was no denying that control had slipped through her fingers. "Harold, she began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Save it, Monica." His eyes, usually indifferent or focused on something far away, were now fixed on her with an intensity she had never seen before. "This boy isn't worth it. Whatever you think you felt, it was never real." Justin stepped forward, the movement so sudden that Monica flinched. "It was real to me," he said, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of desperation. "I love her." Harold's expression hardened, and for a moment, the room felt as if it might shatter under the force of the tension. He took a step toward Justin, the air between them crackling with unspoken threats. Monica moved between them instinctively, her palms pressing against Harold's chest. "Please," she whispered, her eyes pleading. "This can't happen like this." But Harold's patience had run out. He pushed her aside, not violently, but with enough force to send her stumbling back. His attention was locked on Justin, who stood rooted to the spot, a mix of defiance and fear crossing his face. "You come into my house," Harold said, his voice low and measured, "and you think you can take what's mine. You don't know what it means to be a man." Justin clenched his fists, his face flushed with anger. "Maybe being a man doesn't mean ignoring your wife until she forgets who she is." The words hung in the air like a slap, and before Monica could react, Harold lunged. It wasn't a calculated move, but a reaction, raw and unchecked. Justin dodged, but the room erupted into chaos. Furniture scraped against the floor, a lamp crashed to the ground, and Monica's scream pierced the noise. "Stop it!" she shouted, but the two men were caught in a struggle that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. Justin shoved Harold back, sending him staggering into the coffee table. There was a moment of silence as Harold stood, panting, his eyes dark with something that made Monica's blood run cold. "Get out," Harold said finally, his voice ragged but steady. "Both of you, now." Justin hesitated, looking at Monica as if waiting for her to protest. But she couldn't move, couldn't speak. The weight of everything that had led to this moment pinned her in place. Justin's expression fell, and with one last glance he turned and left, the door slamming behind him. Harold stood still for a long moment, his gaze unfocused, as if he was trying to process what had just happened. Then he walked past Monica without a word, disappearing into his study and closing the door behind him. The sound of the lock clicking sent a shiver down her spine. The hours that followed were an unbearable silence. Monica sat in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of Harold pacing in his study. She wanted to knock, to say something that would dissolve the tension, but the look in his eyes from earlier stopped her. She knew that whatever trust or connection they once had was now a fractured memory. When she finally drifted off on the sofa, the weight of exhaustion pulling her into an uneasy sleep, she was jolted awake by a noise she couldn't quite place. The house was silent again, but the air felt wrong. She sat up, heart thudding, and strained to listen. It was then she noticed a light flickering at the edge of the hallway, the glow slipping beneath the study door. Panic set in as she stood and moved toward the door, the wood cool against her fingers as she knocked. "Harold?" she called softly. There was no answer, only the sound of something heavy shifting behind the door. The lock clicked again, but this time it wasn't Harold opening the door. It was the door opening to reveal Harold standing there, face shadowed, eyes dark with resolve. In his hand was a lighter, the flame dancing as he stared at her. "Monica," he said, voice low and empty, "there are consequences for betrayal." Before she could react, The smell of gasoline hit her, and the realization came too late. The world around her erupted in a flash of heat and light, the flames roaring to life as Harold turned and disappeared into the night, leaving chaos in his wake. The fire spread quickly, consuming the room as Monica scrambled back, coughing and blinded by smoke. Outside, neighbors were already gathering, shouts and the sound of sirens piercing the suffocating heat. But by the time the fire was put out, the damage was done. Monica was found unconscious but alive, her world reduced to ashes, and Harold was nowhere to be seen. The neighborhood was shrouded in a tense silence the morning after the fire. Smoke still lingered in the air, curling up from the charred remains of Monica's once pristine home. The news had spread fast. Whispers of betrayal and tragedy passed from house to house like wildfire. But the most chilling piece of news was that Harold Lewis had vanished without a trace. Detective Samuel Green stood amidst the ashes, the faint crackle of burned wood beneath his boots. He was a tall, imposing man with eyes that missed nothing. His brow furrowed as he surveyed the scene, the remnants of a life unraveled by secrets. The scorched living room, the broken furniture, the blackened walls all told a story of chaos and rage. But it was the lighter found near the doorway, its metal singed and twisted, that caught his attention. "Bag this," Green said to the officer standing beside him. He knew that such a detail, seemingly small, could be the thread that unraveled the entire case. Monica was taken to the hospital that night, barely conscious and coughing from the smoke that had filled her lungs. The burns on her arms were minor, but the trauma went deeper. She lay in the sterile room, the white sheets cold against her skin, as the events of the past night replayed in her mind Harold's face, the flicker of the lighter, the roar of the flames. Each memory struck like a blow. When Green entered her hospital room, she turned away, staring at the window that overlooked the gray sky. She didn't flinch when he pulled up a chair, the silence between them heavy with questions neither wanted to start with. "Mrs. Lewis," he said finally, his voice measured, "I'm here to talk about what happened last night." Monica's fingers tightened around the thin hospital blanket, the fabric bunching in her fists. "He did it," she whispered, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Harold. He set the fire." Green nodded slightly, as if he'd already suspected as much. "Do you know where he might have gone?" "No," she said, the word feeling as empty as the space Harold had left behind. "But he knew what he was doing. He wanted to hurt me." The detective leaned forward, the chair creaking under his weight. "Your neighbors reported seeing a young man leaving your house shortly before the fire? Justin Carter, I believe?" Monica's chest tightened, but she kept her expression unreadable. "He had nothing to do with this." Green didn't press further, but the slight shift in his eyes told her he'd noted the way her voice wavered. "We'll need to talk to him as well. And to you, again, when you're ready." Outside, the sun struggled to break through the clouds, casting a pale light over the city. Justin sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the phone in his hand. He hadn't heard from Monica since the fire, and his mind raced with images of flames and the last look in Harold's eyes. He knew he should go to the police, explain everything, but fear rooted him in place. His mother, Camilla, had noticed his strange behavior but chose to stay silent, hoping that whatever troubled him would pass like a shadow. When the knock came on their door that afternoon, it was like a gunshot. Justin's pulse quickened as he watched his mother open the door to Detective Green. The detective's eyes met Justin's, and in that moment, Justin knew that silence was no longer an option. "Justin Carter," Green said, voice steady. "I need to ask you a few questions about the night of the fire." The interview at the station was a blur of questions and answers. Justin recounted what he could, the arguments, Harold's rage, and the fire that followed. Green listened, piecing together the puzzle with the patience of a man who had seen the worst of human nature but still searched for the truth. When Justin admitted his relationship with Monica, the detective's expression didn't change, but the weight of judgment hung in the room like smoke. Back at the hospital, Monica was released with a warning to rest, but peace was elusive. The emptiness of her charred home haunted her as she stayed with a friend, unable to escape the questions of the neighbors who peered through curtains and whispered as she passed. Rumors swirled, some calling her a victim, others a catalyst for her own downfall. Green worked the case relentlessly, his instincts driving him to find Harold before he could disappear for good. The search spanned days, stretching into a week. Leads went cold, and frustration gnawed at the edges of the investigation. But then, a break came. Surveillance footage from a gas station on the outskirts of Charleston showed Harold, disheveled and hollow-eyed, filling a tank and paying in cash before vanishing into the night once more. It was enough for Green to trace him to an old cabin in the woods, a property Harold's late uncle had left him years ago. The night was pitch black when the police arrived, the forest thick and alive with the hum of crickets. The officers moved in silence, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the dark. Green found Harold sitting on the front steps of the cabin, the lighter still clutched in his hand. His eyes met Green's, weary and resigned. "It was supposed to end with the fire," Harold said, his voice hoarse. "But it didn't. Now I have nothing left." "You have your choices," Green replied, handcuffs clicking as he secured them around Harold's wrists. "And now you'll face the consequences." The trial that followed was swift and brutal. The prosecution painted a clear picture of Harold as a man pushed beyond the brink by jealousy and betrayal. Monica testified, her voice steady but haunted, recounting the events that led to that fateful night. Justin sat in the back of the courtroom, the guilt of his involvement etched into his features. In the end, Harold was sentenced to life in prison without parole, the weight of his actions sealing his fate. The neighborhood that once whispered with admiration about the Lewis family now fell silent, their legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. Monica moved away from Charleston, starting over in a city where no one knew her name or the scandal that shadowed her past. Justin returned to college, forever changed by the summer that taught him the devastating cost of desire. And Detective Green, ever vigilant, filed the case away, a reminder that even the smallest spark of betrayal could ignite an inferno.